Hello, it's James from Marketing for Restaurants here, and welcome to episode 49 of Secret Sauce, the secrets of leasing property for your restaurant.
Some restaurants are quiet, lose money, and the owner works 70 hours a week. Other restaurants are busy, profitable, and the owners work a few hours a day. What's the difference? They have a secret sauce. Join James from Marketing for Restaurants as he helps you come up with your recipe for restaurant success. Your secret sauce.
Welcome back, everyone. Today's topic is going to be a little bit more interesting than it normally would be for restaurants in Australia, which is why I thought that we would have a talk about it today. What I've done is we're going to talk to Robbie Doyle, who is our resident restaurant real estate expert. Robbie's been a chef. He's now a real estate agent who helps people buy restaurants, grow them, and sell them. And we're going to get him in to help understand some of the issues with leases. It's an area that I think a lot of restaurant owners find pretty boring. They just get in and they sign the contract and then they hope that it's all good. Well, a lot of the time it's not all good. And that's been highlighted by something that's recently happened in Australia where a restaurant chain called Sumo Salad, they have a number of companies that manage the leases on behalf of their franchisees. Now, Luke Bayliss, the CEO of Sumo Salad, has put two of these companies that handle these leases on behalf of their franchisees into administration because of their inability to renegotiate the leases with Westfield. What has happened in Australia, as is a huge trend, and I think it's probably a global trend, is that as shopping malls have become increasingly profit challenged from online shopping, they've tried to make it more of an experience, which means that there's a lot more restaurants in a shopping centre than there used to be. Now, that fundamentally affects the profitability of the restaurant, particularly when you look at some shopping centres and you think, wow, there's not that many people in here. These are huge places. There's not that many people in here. When every second establishment is a restaurant, there's a lot of restaurants fighting over very few people, and that fundamentally affects the profitability of those restaurants. So Sumo Salad have placed these businesses in administration because they were unable to renegotiate their leases. So it's a complicated area. It's an area that can fundamentally affect your business. So let's have a chat to Robbie now and see if he can shine some light on some of the ways that you can better understand the lease and negotiate better as well. Hey, Robbie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Good to be back.
Excellent. So there's been some very interesting developments in Australia around restaurant leases, which I think are sort of emblematic of some big problems that are happening on a global basis, talking to restaurant owners in the US and the UK as well. Do you want to run us through what has happened with Sumo Salad and what your thoughts are on it?
Yeah, sure, James. Sumo Salad are taking a very brave stance, and I think that they're my heroes. I was waiting for somebody, a champion, to step up and literally draw a line in the sand and say, you know, our relationship as a tenant and a landlord has to be equal, not slanted totally in the landlord's favour. And what happens is, when times are good, the landlord says, oh, I want some percentage rent because you've actually achieved greater sales than we expected, and we're delighted for you. But you can pay us another 8%. And, James, that's not a bad thing because you do want to get to that level. You do want to be that busy that you're actually achieving beyond your sales. However, when the economy contracts, when things slow down, when you have media and you go through a general election and people are saying, oh, we're broke, we have no money, there's a housing bubble, there's no money for discretionary spending, and everybody is talking down the economy, at that stage, the landlords are still locked in the good times mode, and their methods of annual increases, they just don't shake. They won't change because they answer to shareholders. But the likes of Sumo have said, hang on, times are now different. There's more competition. You're allowing similar style retailers in nearly on top of us within your floor plan. It's not fair. And asking for a 5% annual increase when on the high street you can get 3%, It's not fair. And now that times are quieter and the sales are down, you should adjust the rent backwards. But of course, that will never happen in the mindset of the landlord. But I think for Sumo Salad to take up the flag and to run out onto the battlefield and try and make a difference and to rally people, I'm really watching that with interest. I think they'll do a quiet deal. I think they'll want them to shut up and go away because it's easier to pick off smaller operators. But Sumo have a big footprint across Australia, and they've recently altered their offering so they have a fresher offering. And the menu has changed, the presentation has changed, and they've branched out into other things besides salads.
And that's the thing. They're not a small operator, 104 sites across Australia. And to actually place the company that's responsible for the leases into administration, that's pretty much drawing a fairly significant line in the sand, really, isn't it?
Sad thing is that the landlords will eventually win. They're just a behemoth. They're just too big. They're global. And it's like trying to turn an oil tanker quickly. In theory, you just say, well, turn the wheel that way and it'll be, 10 miles later and it's still moving. They won't change and there will be blood on the street. But what will happen is that they will force people to be more creative in looking for alternatives. You don't have to be in a shopping centre to benefit from the number of people that visit the shopping centre. So strip areas, strip shops, retail precincts adjacent to shopping centres is where you want to be with good traffic flow. We're all getting, James, people are getting lazier. They don't want to even get out of the car to get a coffee or sushi or a salad or a sandwich. So if there's a drive-through, the amount of inquiries I get on drive-through, it's just growing in popularity. And it's not going to change. But I think you'll find people will drift away from the big box retail centres and then go back to finding alternatives. And that's where secondary sites become trendy. If you get a working class area or a rundown area where rents are cheap, you get some young entrepreneurs that go in. Somebody sets up a barber shop, somebody else sets up a kind of bespoke coffee roastery, and there's somebody doing, a bookshop, T-shirts, vinyl records. It gets a new eclectic mix, an art gallery pops up. Suddenly, those little areas then become trendy and become popular, and then the rents are still affordable. And you'll see, if you look back 10 years ago, you'll see certain streets that and you go, my God, I remember when that was a really run-down area. Now it looks like it's in the Renaissance. And that's because of the landlords in the shopping centres. They just cannot see beyond the economy that we see. They have an annual report to the shareholders, and it's all about the share price. It's not about the reality. It's about keeping the value of the business overall up.
And I know, so one of the trends that's, probably more specific to Australia, or the general trend is that retail is really struggling because of companies like Amazon. Now, the thing that makes it really pertinent in Australia, of course, is that Amazon is about to open, which means that companies like Westfield are going to be a lot more focused on experiential type.
They're designing precincts to attract families and pensioners and retirees and young people. And that's also adding stress to the restaurant industry, because what's happening is the operators in those precincts, where there might have been 5 cafes in the shopping centres, suddenly there's 11. Or there's 5 restaurants, then suddenly there's 15 all around the outside. They try and maximise the dollar return.
And it makes it hard if you're an individual operator sitting in there when people only had, 10 places, 10 options for where they could eat while they were doing their shopping. Now there's 30 places and there's less places to go shopping. So it is...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a renaissance as well with cinema. They're building cinemas and entertainment complexes, and they're almost it's almost like a massive retirement village, but for those who are not retired.
Yep.
They're offering everything, short of in lawn bowls. They're morphing into basically destinations.
Yes.
Rather than, I just need to get some coffee and I need to get some bread and milk and I need to get something for dinner tonight, and you just duck in and do your shop, or you do a weekly shop. It's almost like they're becoming attractions, and they're still hooked on this old 5% annual increase. And they start off with, what they do, James, is they lure you in with a generous contribution.
Yep.
And there's no such thing as free money. Nobody gives you money for free. If they do, take it, but be very careful about what the hook is in it. There's a hook. And what they do to you, particularly to non-experienced or young entrepreneurs, I've seen people being offered 100,000 plus, over 100,000 for a 20 square metre kiosk. If only you'll open a kiosk in my shopping centre here in WA, I will give you 100,000, up to 120,000. The cost of building a kiosk, James, for a cafe or a food outlet, it's actually higher per square metre because it's more complicated. There's no extraction, there's no grease traps usually. And you could spend like 150 to 200 plus, depending on the finish. But they're giving you nearly half of that up front as an incentive. And I see people rushing in to take up that opportunity. And it's just a time bomb waiting to go off because they start you off on a high rent. And then they ratchet it up. They have compound interest, 5% per annum, when the economy is running at 3.5%. And then after year two, people are ringing me saying, oh, the landlord's a greedy so-and-so, and I should never have signed this lease. Get me out of here. So what do I do? Do I pass that poison chalice onto some unsuspecting victim? Or do you sit down and say, well, let's try and negotiate the lease? And you'll find that the lure to get into the toxic lease in the beginning was free money.
Yep. And I think that's a good segue in because I think it's one of the areas that a lot of restaurant operators aren't savvy in. And I think a lot of it comes down to you just don't know what's on the table and what's off the table when it comes to the lease. So
absolutely, yeah.
How many
people don't know.
Exactly, yeah. So, and that's why I thought it'd be perfect to get an expert like you in to run through some of the intricacies of leasing. And it's not something that, and I think the other thing that's concerning is that it's one of those things that you may only negotiate, once every, 5 years maybe. So
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Now, so how many restaurants would lease their premises as opposed to buy?
James, there's always a demand for people who want to buy. The switched-on operator wants to buy the property.
Yep.
Getting access to properties for sale is very rare and very difficult, unless it's a new development and you're buying off the plan and you can buy the strata. That's where you have an eye on a long-term plan. So you know your neighbourhood, you know where you'd like to have your restaurant. You see a development going in. It might be a block of apartments. It could be a development with retail and office. And you say, there's 200 square metres. Perfect. And you can either lease it or buy it. And if you're smart, you'll buy it because it'll always go up. There's such a scarcity, there's such a rarity. And in WA, we have a lot of Asian buyers, and they will not lease, they just want to buy, and they'll wait. And sometimes they'll buy and then lease as a landlord to become a mini landlord.
Yep.
But ideally, if you could buy, you would. But the unfortunate thing is some people don't have the money or the vision or the plan. They're just in love with the whole idea of opening my restaurant.
Yeah.
They don't have an exit strategy.
So what types of leases are there?
Well, generally you have two types in Australia. You have a retail lease, which is well governed by each state and each government. The retail lease offers a lot of protection. And then you have a commercial lease, which is just a regular non-retail lease. So the government defines a retail lease, as predominantly where a retail service is conducted and there's at least 5 units in a complex. They don't have to be owned by the same landlord. The attractiveness of a retail lease is that there's a mechanism for low-cost dispute resolution. For example, if you dispute something with your landlord in a retail lease, there's in each state you have something called the State Administrative Tribunal or the Small Business Commissioner, and you can go for mediation if you're in dispute. And you can get to the set format, and it's cheap. In fact, it's free in most of the cases. The difference between the leases is that on a non-retail lease, sometimes the bank guarantee or the personal guarantee survives after the lease is over. I'm dealing with one person at the moment who leased a cafe in a government, semi-government owned building complex for 10 years. And he wanted to sell and had a buyer, and the buyer wanted a new lease. initially they've just said, look, we'll assign the current term remaining, which is only 10 months. We'll see how you perform, and if you're good, we might give you another lease. And if in the 10 months remaining, once he sells the business, the current owner is still on the hook as a personal guarantor. Whereas that would not happen with a retail lease. Once you sell it, you're off the hook. But people have no idea about what they're signing. They don't understand what a personal guarantee is. And they're just so anxious to get in and get the deal out there. They feel lucky. Or the agent persuades them that you better hurry up, sign here, give me a deposit. And other people waiting for this. If you don't want to do it, other people will. They'll put thumb screws on people. But realistically, it's like marrying in haste and then repenting at your leisure. Don't rush in.
Yep.
Take your time and get a lawyer to help you.
So what's a good lease look like then? What are the kind of things that you want to be looking at to see that the lease is going to be a lease that you're going to be able to work with?
The main thing is your exit plan. And that's a contradiction. You're only starting off. We're only signing a lease. But I'm saying to people, what is your exit plan? How are you going to get out? How are you going to sell it? Are you going to die? Are you going to retire out of this? Are you going to hand it on to your family? So if you have a long-term plan, rather than, say, 5 years, but a long-term plan, and you might say, well, I'm going to invest a lot in a fit-out, and I'm going to spend $300,000 fitting out a property. But how do you get your 300 back? And will you get it back if you sell it after 2 years and there's only 3 years remaining on a lease, is that enough time for someone else? Is that attractive? And the answer is no, because they'll say, I'll make an offer subject to there being another option. So you need to, in the beginning, ask your landlord for a long lease or at least a lease with options. So 5 by 5. Landlords don't like giving too long of an option because it gives control to the tenant rather than to the landlord.
Yep.
So with a lease, you look out for your annual percentage increases, how that's calculated. Is it fair? People who signed leases in 2007 were happy to sign 5%. But if you ask somebody now to sign a 5% annual increase, it's not fair. It's beyond the economy.
Yep.
What happens if the landlord sells the property? Is my lease secure? If the landlord sells a property and it has an option, the new owner, in some instances, do not have to honour the option. So say you have a 5 plus 5, and in year 4, your landlord sells to somebody else. The new landlord comes in, and then you say, oh, I want to exercise my option. They can actually say, well, we don't recognise the option. So again, you need to always have a good lawyer, always read the lease, spend money. Don't be afraid to spend money on a lawyer. It's tax deductible before you sign the lease. Get it read and have an exit plan. How do I get out of it? How do I assign it? Is there sufficient time to get a return on my investment? And will there be sufficient time for the next person to get a return?
So just that little thing there, that's one of those kind of things that's scary because no one's thinking about what if the landlord sells. But if the landlord sells,
James, yeah.
Then, and you're thinking I've got the 5-year option, so if it's going well, I'll just exercise that and it's all locked in and it's all going to be happy. But then you lose that option. And if it is going well...
Sometimes you can put a caveat on an option, but then sometimes the lease will say that you can't put a caveat on an option. But people don't see that. Because, a lot of people try and save money. They say, the landlord's agent's a really nice guy or she's a nice person. I get on really well with them. The landlord's lovely, really nice. I'm very happy. But then if the landlord changes, and landlords do, they sell portfolios, they sell off chunks of their land or their buildings to invest in other things. Having a lawyer read the lease and and not a lawyer only a lawyer that does commercial property, not somebody that does, wills or divorces. Some lawyers, no disrespect to lawyers, but some lawyers will take any work that comes their way, and then they'll look up, they'll Google it to see if it's a good lease or a bad lease. You need to talk to a specific lawyer that has commercial industry and commercial property experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are there any other traps in a lease then that people should be looking for?
One of the ones that most people gloss over is a redevelopment clause, where the landlord can actually say, I'm going to redevelop this land and I'm going to give you 6 months' notice, and then you're gone. You clean up and go. And you go, what? And they say, yeah, it's redevelopment clause, it's in your lease. And you go, but what does that mean? And it means precisely that. So what you do before you sign a lease, you go down to your local government agency, Department of Planning, Town Planning, and you say, is there anything lodged? Are there any restraints? For example, if you had a single-story corner shop and you owned 3 or 4 shops either side of it, or 2 shops either side of it, there's a thing called a plot ratio. And the plot ratio is the space above the first floor. That doesn't now exist. But you might be able to go up 4 floors. You might be able to go up 6 floors. So then the attractiveness of that plot of land becomes far more valuable. But as a cafe or a restaurant operator, you just love to have that corner because it's high profile and people can see you and it's easy to park and you know good passing traffic. But the landlord might, or the owner might be an older person who might have, you know, they're coming to the end of their life, they want to sell up. They'll sell that to a developer. And the developer will say, well, I can build 22 apartments above that, and I can have four retail shops on the ground floor, or 5. Now, what they do is they'll say, oh, look, we're sorry about that, James, but, you know, we'll give you a good lease and terms if you want to come back in as a tenant, but that'll be 18 months to 2 years from now. So what do? You're gone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite scary, isn't it?
James, having a lawyer read that lease first is vital.
So you get your lease and you have a look at it, and then you have concerns about it. What's negotiable?
I think the first impression that you make with a leasing agent is vital. If you come across as naive and young, and you know, or even but naive and old, it doesn't really matter. They will not necessarily offer you alternatives or let you know what the landlord may or may not give. Their job is to do the deal at a good rate for the landlord. It's the landlord that pays them. But what you can negotiate is like, and another thing to look at, James, as well, is that there might be a make good clause in a lease. So let's say you decide after 5 years, look, this site doesn't work for me. The landlord might come along and say to you, well, you know, you have to make good. And you go, what? And that says, well, bring it back to an empty shell. Take out your kitchen, take out the toilets, 2 coats of paint, white paint on the wall. I need the floors back, strip the tiles back, take out the light, the fittings. I want the ceilings exposed. And that's called making good. But most people don't look at that because all they're thinking about is opening. They don't think about how to exit. So you have to read the lease and you have to negotiate. And what's negotiable is the landlord, if you come across with a business plan and you know, you've done your research, you've looked around, you know what the rates are per square metre, you can visibly and physically demonstrate that you're switched on, the landlord and the landlord's agent will take you far more seriously. If you ask or play, you know, games and say, oh, I want a huge contribution, the landlord will just shake their head and go, this guy's an idiot. You know, who else is out looking, because this guy's just off the planet with his expectations and his demands. So know what's available, know what the contributions are. It might be 3 months rent-free. It might be, if it's a new shop, you might get 42 days to do a fit-out, and plus 3 months. You might get more. You might get another 6 months. The landlord might contribute towards air conditioning. He might contribute towards a grease trap. He might contribute towards, you know, tenancy improvements. But you won't get them if you don't ask.
And that's one of the things that I think happens a lot of the time, that people just look at it and go, well, that's not going to work for me. And particularly, see, one of the things that I think is it always depends on how long the place has been vacant for. I know our local coffee shop close to where I live, he closed up and that place was vacant for 6 months.
And you'll shake your head and scratch your head and go, why doesn't the landlord just take a deal? And you know why, James? The reason they won't is that the landlord has a mortgage with the bank, and the bank values his property based on the annual square meterage rent. So let's say he was getting $400 a square meter or $600 a square meter plus variable outgoings.
Yep.
And the variable outgoings covers the rates and the land tax and the water rates and insurance and stuff like that. So if the landlord, Mr. Landlord, is desperate and his shop is empty for 6 months and he drops his annual rent down to, say, $275 from $400, the bank may then come back and revalue his property and call in a loan or ask him to top up his particular commercial loan. So sometimes it's better to wear the pain for a landlord of not leasing and holding firm until the economy picks up and demand picks up, and you get the rate that you need to support the valuation that the bank has given, because sometimes the landlord may have used that as leverage for another investment. And that's the answer. And most people don't know that because they go, landlords are idiots. That shop's been empty a year. Why hasn't he taken, he's dreaming if he gets 80 grand a year, he should be lucky to get 50. But he can't.
Because that's going to unwind his property portfolio.
Correct. And
yeah.
that civilians don't know that. They just shake their head and go, bloody landlords, idiots. They don't know what they're doing. In fact, they do. And sometimes the landlord's under a lot of pressure too. So it's not all like healthy and days for landlords. Some landlords are just barely in the market by their fingertips. And they may have entered the market at a high point and paid too much. And most tenants are not aware. They're not aware of the pressures that a landlord can be under. Usually smaller landlords. I'm not talking about the big guys. But sometimes it happens to them as well. But mostly it's a smaller landlord that has issues.
And I think it's only going to be more interesting because pretty much worldwide, interest rates are at a very low point. When they start ticking back up again, that's going to put more pressure on landlords.
Oh, look, absolutely. It's not a one-way street. Like sometimes, at some point in time, landlords will. I see it now. I see landlords meeting the market, and there are buildings on certain main streets or iconic streets in each city. And you'd say, well, that building is full. There's no for lease signs or no for rent signs. And that's because the landlord's meeting the market and will ride out knowing that times will pick up, and he will have factored in rent increases or a market review. So a market review is when the landlord and the tenant have an opportunity to see, well, what's the market paying now? And what they do is, a landlord doing a market review should not take into consideration the goodwill of a business or any tenancy improvements. And I think that's where the struggle begins, because if you have a pizzeria that's going gangbusters and it's doing really great business, then the landlord looks at that and goes, that guy's making a fortune. He can easily pay this rent, and he hikes the rent up. And it might be that he's just a really good operator. And his goodwill is what he generated, not what the landlord did.
So what are the tips then for restaurant owners? How can they negotiate better with their landlord? What do you see the smart operators doing when it comes to negotiating with a landlord?
The first thing, negotiation is all about relationships, and it's about trust. And if you build a relationship from day one, and I mean, you might not feel like it. The property manager might be irritating, might be hard to get in touch with, or might, but I want everybody just to be nice. Be nice, be pleasant, be professional.
Yep.
Be responsive. If you're in trouble, put your hand up. If you're at the beach and you're drowning and you put your hand up, hopefully a lifeguard will run in and save you. So if you get into trouble, or if you're negotiating something tricky, the strength of your established relationship will actually come to your aid in times of duress. And it's always nice to have easy people to deal with. Property managers, asset managers are usually very overworked. They're treated like slaves. They have a tremendous amount of pressure applied on them, and they have a terribly difficult job. And most tenants look at them and go, it's their fault. They're horrible. They're rude. They don't even look at me. They won't return my calls. They have no idea the pain I'm going through. And I'm telling you that most property managers suffer a worse fate. They're under a different stress. They're literally worked like donkeys. And you have to have a relationship with them and empathize with them. And they'll empathize with you. But if you start being snotty or rude or aggressive, you just don't need that. And that's the magic, that's the mojo that people miss. Be nice. Be professional.
Yeah. So, renewals. What are the tricks to handling the renewal, and how can that go off the rails?
The renewal is where the inexperienced meets the experienced. So a man with money and a man with experience, when they meet, the man with experience will end up with the money, and the man with the money will end up with the experience. plan ahead. When your renewal comes, you must have it factored into your business plan. Don't wait till the last few months. I have a client who rang me the other day, and he has a 1,200 square metre gymnasium. And next door to it, he had leased three 300 square metre units from a separate landlord. And he put a creche, and he put yoga, and he put something else, some dietary things, some fitness, into the other smaller 300 units. And the separate landlord, the landlord that has a 300 units, knows that he needs those sites and won't negotiate on the rent. Just won't. He won't drop it. Although other landlords in the same precinct have dropped it nearly to half of what they were getting. So say they were getting 160 a square metre for a commercial showroom property, they're now accepting 85. This landlord knows. So in a negotiation, it's always who knows what it means, and when you know it. And arm yourself with a plan. Don't just trundle through going, well, I hope the landlord renews it. You need to have this strategy before you open your door.
Yep.
And it's about relationships, and it's about you become a trusted associate of the landlord. He loves you. He likes you. He brings his family to your restaurant. Don't let it get to the stage where, you're an unknown personality. Personalize it. And, plan it in advance. Give yourself sufficient time, because if he turns out to be a nasty landlord, or he changes and sells and the new landlord is more commercially minded and doesn't know you, or maybe based overseas, you have to have relationships to protect you, and you need a strategy. So hoping is not a strategy. Planning is.
Yep.
And then executing the plan. And it's built on relationships. And it's built on being easy. Pay your rent. Be nice. Help the landlord if you can. And then build that kind of rapport. But if you come up to renewal and the landlord knows that you're stuck, you're over a barrel, there's nothing you can do. If you haven't planned for it, you're a victim.
So flipping it around then, what do you think with the landlords that you're working with, when they've got a space and they're looking for a new restaurant operator to come in to occupy that space, because of the fact that, a lot of restaurants tend to go belly up, what is it that they're looking for? How can a new restaurant operator present themselves in the best possible light so that they're able to get that lease in a competitive situation? What is it that the landlord is looking for in a good tenant?
The first impression and the plan. Have you got a business plan? And does the plan have a marketing plan that runs alongside it? Because after the honeymoon period of you're open and you're the new restaurant in the new neighbourhood is over, if you're not continually strategizing, marketing, working never stop marketing and always have a business plan and work the plan. That's what the landlord sees. If he sees somebody that has a downloadable business plan template that just looks amateurish, like it's the first impression. But if you can say, I'm going to have, a Facebook campaign that's going to run There are 2 billion people now on Facebook. I want part of the action. I'm going to be aggressive on this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. You need to show longevity, because you're offering security to the landlord that you have a long-term plan. Whereas if you go in and typically people say, I'm not sure. I don't want a 5-year lease, but I'll take a 2+3 and then we'll see how we go. If you don't back yourself, the landlord won't.
It doesn't sound very confident and inspiring, does it?
But it happens all the time. James, I was asked a few weeks ago for a 1+1+1+1+1. And you sit and look at these people and you say, where did you get that idea from? Why would a landlord do that? You've wasted my time. I've lost half an hour of my life. Good luck. See you later. I don't want to even finish this conversation with you. Go away. And they're looking at you, they're going, we thought that was a good idea,
Yeah.
It's not a good idea.
So they're still looking for a property then?
And they will, and they'll drift around and they'll go to barbecues and the people say, what are you doing? We're looking to open a restaurant. Oh, good, yeah, where are you looking? We're looking here. And it becomes part of they're going to do it someday, It's not a plan. I actually met somebody last week and they said to me, the woman said to me, yes, my husband's been looking for a business for 5 years. And I said, 5 years? 5 years, and you haven't found what you're looking for. I know that sounds like a U2 song. After 5 years, if you haven't found what you're looking for, you're looking in the wrong place. I don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah. It doesn't sound right, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I spent an hour with them. I had a coffee with them, and I gave them some ideas to think about and some homework. I call it homework. I say, go away and think about this and come back to me. And they usually are very appreciative because it makes them think beyond the kind of nostalgic idea of, I could have a little restaurant or I'd love to have a little cafe or whatever. Actually the day-to-day stuff and the plan and doing it right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's some of the type of thinking I come across in my job, and it makes my job interesting too. They're nice people, and you get an opportunity to help them if you can, and just give them some guidance.
Excellent. So, getting that first location, that is a tough gig. It's very hard to do, and I think sometimes it requires a little bit of out of the box thinking. How did you get your first start? What was your first restaurant? How did you tackle that problem?
James, I was young and hungry and ambitious, and I came from quite humble beginnings. I had this hunger inside me to have my own restaurant, and I was 23 or 24 at the time, and this is what happened. I got on public transport. I got a bus into the city centre of Dublin. I had selected 3 strategically located cafes, and I walked in and I knocked on the doors and I asked the one I wanted most, the one I identified as being my ideal location. I knocked on the door, and this is what happened. The lady opened the door and she said, "Hi," and I said, "Hello." I said, "Can you tell me what time you close?" And she said, 3:30, 4 o'clock. I said, "How many days do you do?" She said, Monday to Friday. And I said, do you ever do the weekends? And she said, "Only if there's a festival on." And the next thing I said was, "Well, I'd like to rent your cafe when you're not here." And she said, "What?" I said, "I'd like to rent your place when you're not here." I said, "You're paying rent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week." I said, "I'd like to use it in the evening time when you're not here. And when you come back in the morning, it'll look like I was never there, and we'll share the facility." And she said, "Come in." And she opened the door and I stepped in and we sat down. And James, this will tell you how old. This was around 1983, 84. There was no mobile. Well, there were mobile phones, but you couldn't carry them. You needed a suitcase to carry the battery. There was no FPOS in those days either, and there was no mobiles. And she picked up the phone and she said to me, "Who are you?" I said, "My name is Robbie Doyle. I'm a chef." And she said to me, "You want to rent my cafe as a restaurant when I'm not here?" And she said, I said, "Here's my CV." So I handed her my CV. And she looked at it and she said, "Oh, you trained with Willie Opperman?" I said, "Yeah." And Willie Opperman was a famous restaurateur in Dublin at the time. And she said, "The Willie Opperman?" I said, "Yeah, Willie. Yeah." I said, "I was his head chef." And she said to me, "What would you do if I phoned Willie?" And I said, "I insist that you do." And she picked up the phone and dialed the number, and the conversation went something like this. "Hi, Willie, it's Monica." And Willie goes, "Hi, Monica. I have a Robbie Doyle with me." And I could hear Willie's voice on the phone going, "Robbie?" And she goes, "Yeah." "What does he want?" "He wants to rent my cafe when I'm not here and turn it into a nighttime restaurant." And all I heard on the phone was, "What a good idea. Give it to him." And she put the phone down and she was smiling. She said, "Willie has said to give it to you." And I said, "Well," she said, "Willie Opperman is my daughter's godfather." And I said, "I had no idea." I said, "I had no idea that you had that knowledge or connection with him." So she said, "Well, how will this work?" So I said, "I'll pay you a deposit and I'll come in when you go home and I'll leave the place cleaner, and I'll put a menu in the window. I'll put tablecloths and candles on the dresser room, and I'll do my menu, and we'll share the facilities and we can share the power bills. We can take readings and do whatever way you want." So we did. And I got my first start. I was so broke, I had to sell a motorcycle to buy my stock and my wine and my food. That meant I had to get the bus around to get in and out of work. And in those days, James, people paid me by check, which was a paper check, and they'd write their bank card number on the back. If I didn't have sufficient cash, I couldn't get a taxi because I didn't have money. Things were that tight. I'd have to walk home. And in Dublin in the winter, no, it's not an attractive option. You know, you could be walking in the rain for 7 or 8 miles, or in the snow or the frost, and it wasn't much fun. But I had that energy and that determination, and that's how I got my start. I eventually went on to get good food reviews, and I had 2 really, really good reviews from highly respected food critics. And I eventually went to Monica and I said, look, Monica, either you go or I go. And she said, well, buy me out. And I said, how much do you want? And she said, would you give me 10 grand? And I said, I will. And I had 7 saved and had to borrow 3. And I got her out. And then that was how I got my first restaurant.
I really love that story because it shows the hard work, the passion, and the smarts to come up with a solution that's actually going to work, because it is really tough, particularly when you're that young, to come up with the capital behind you. And, you know, the world is littered with undercapitalised restaurateurs. But, you know, that hard work, passion, and a smart idea to be able to start the business, which, you know, you've kind of de-risked it by not taking out the entire lease yourself. You've given yourself every possible chance to be able to start a successful restaurant. And this is the tragedy of it. You see people who haven't taken that sort of approach. They haven't de-risked it when it comes to the lease. And, you know, the classic one I see is, we've allocated 3 months for fit out, but fit out takes 9 months. So they're paying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You pay the lease for an extra 6 months, and that's out. And on top of that, you're trying to find a wage. You know, you're trying to live, and you know,
And you're right, spot on.
And they go under. And one of the local restaurants that happened to, and they put a post up on Facebook saying, you know, we're really sorry we have to close. And the other mistake they made was they hadn't costed the bloody menu, of course. And they were selling stuff at a loss. And it was interesting because I told him he needed to cost it and he needed to do it urgently, and he did it and put his prices up by 20%. No one noticed, but he did that.
Yeah.
Yep, he did it 4 weeks before he closed, and it was too little too late. And
so sad, isn't it? So tragic.
Well, the thing, everyone says that they've got amazing food. The thing that was amazing was when he said, we're really sorry, but we're going to have to close, was there was 100 comments from locals saying, where am I going to go and have breakfast? I'm really sad. Can you tell us when you're going to open another restaurant because we loved your food? There's lots of people who put that up on Facebook, and everyone just goes, yeah, good. I went there once and it was awful.
I think a lot of chefs are like artists. You know, they're not necessarily, they're very creative and very passionate, but it doesn't necessarily mean they also have to share the same passion for business systems or for ongoing keeping records or keeping, you know, your handle on GST or VAT or whatever tax you have to pay or superannuation, and how to work in account, like if you get 30 days or 15 days. They don't have that experience, but they know how to play it really well. And they know what's on trend, but they just haven't got the business side, or they haven't honed their business skills.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Robbie. I think you've really demystified something that, you know, far too many restaurant owners really have got no idea about. And, you know, hopefully they'll be able to have their eyes a little more wide open when they go into the negotiations with their landlords.
For sure.
Lots of really good information there.
If any of your listeners need any, feel free to email me. After the last podcast, I had 4 different restaurants from the Sydney area and Melbourne area contact me just for general questions, and I was happy to help them.
Yep. Oh, that's very generous. I'll put your contact details in the show notes. And I think the thing that will be really interesting is we'll have to lock a time in and we'll come back and we'll talk about how to sell a restaurant. And that's the thing I like. I think that places you in a unique point with a unique point of view and a unique sort of set of knowledge, because you're interested in helping people buy, grow, and then sell their restaurant. And on top of that, you've been a chef, so you're sort of covering all of the bases there.
I know the pain that they can go through, and I'd love to see young people doing well, you know?
Yep. And that passion comes through, and I think sadly, how to sell a a restaurant will be a very, very popular podcast. So, but yeah, we'll do that in a couple of weeks. So thank you very much, Robbie, and we'll talk soon.
Good. Always a pleasure, James.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Awesome. I think Robbie was definitely the right person to get in to have that discussion. He really understands it. He sees this day in and day out, and he actually cares about the success of the people that he is putting into the restaurants that he is selling. So he can see it, and he's also got the understanding because he's seen it from the other side as well as a chef. And I really love that story about his first restaurant. I've seen a few people play with this sort of idea. It's important to get the legals done. As he said, get a lawyer involved with it. One of our customers, she was running a lunch and dinner venue, so shared the lease with someone who was going to do brekkie. That sort of fell apart because the person didn't live up to their end of the bargain, and that cost them quite a lot of money, and that's really quite sad to see. So hopefully you got something out of it, and that's about it. Have a really busy week. Bye.
Want more customers for your restaurant, cafe or takeout? Every month, our marketing tools and information are used by thousands of restaurant owners just like you to help them find more customers and turn them into repeat customers. All of our tools and information is designed specifically for restaurant owners. We know you don't have a lot of time to spend marketing or learning complicated procedures, so our tools are quick and easy to use. If you're looking to increase your revenue and profits or want to work less hours, check out marketingforrestaurants.com.